Hello and welcome to Bunto's Silent Dogfight, episode number 29. The Panama Papers, and our special guest tonight is, of course, the fantastic Jeff Keller. I'm your host, Bunto Skiffler, and as per usual, we will open up the room to participants after the interview. Thanks. Let me give you a quick bio background nutshell on our fantastic returning guest. He's located in the D.C. area, and he's one of my personal faves. He works also within the publishing biz. How are you doing, Jeff? Did you have a good day today?
I'm well, thanks, and yes, I did. Thank you. Hope you did
How,
too.
how's the weather up there? Right now it's, inching up to about the 80s, but a lot cooler than last year.
Yes, it's cool here as well, but it's spring for the most part. The grass is green. I've already mowed once, so it's good. If we have a few more cool days, that's fine with me. I'm not so ready for hot, sweltering summer quite yet. So,
Right. It's so
it's
much
good.
for global warming, right, Jeff?
Well, yeah, I guess I'm for global warming mostly, but that's another topic. So go ahead.
Okay, well, the topic for tonight is something called the Panama Papers. You, of course, confuse these with the Pentagon Papers, right?
Yeah.
Right.
First time I read the article, I was like, "Oh, the Pentagon Papers. That's an old story. Why are we talking about this? Oh, it's Panama. Okay."
All right. Well, the Panama will go before the Pentagon. Okay, so just to tell all the noobs who haven't heard about this, fantastic breaking story this week. The Pentagon Papers, these documents show how wealthy individuals, including public officials, hide their money from public scrutiny. Now, I lifted these crib notes from the, Wikipedia. The UK was singled out by the media as being at the heart of a super rich tax avoidance network. However, the most obvious use of offshore financial centers is to avoid taxes, as journalists and researchers such as the economists in the Tax Justice Network have previously remarked. Igor Angelini, head of Europol's Financial Intelligence Group, also recently said that the shell companies used for this purpose also play an important role in large-scale money laundering activities and also corruption. They are often a means to, quote, transfer bribe money, end quote. The Tax Justice Network says that Panama, the country, is one of the oldest and best-known tax havens in the Americas, as well as the, quote, recipient of drug money from Latin America, plus ample other sources of dirty money from the U.S. and elsewhere, end quote. According to The Conversation, which I imagine is some publication, in recent years, Panama has adopted a hardline position as a jurisdiction that refuses to cooperate with international transparency initiatives. Alrighty. Edward Snowden, remember him, described the release in a Twitter message as, quote, the biggest leak in the history of data journalism, end quote. Icelandic investigative journalist and WikiLeaks spokesperson Kirsten Hrafnsson has called the Panama Papers to be published in full online. Hrafnsson, who worked on Cablegate in 2010, said the withholding of documents is understandable to maximize the impact, of course, but said in the end the paper should be published in full for the public to access. Later, WikiLeaks criticized the Panama Papers connection between the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists and Süddeutsche Zeitung, that's the paper that it released to, with the American government. WikiLeaks said that this connection seriously undermines its integrity, saying that, quote, if you censor more than 99% of the documents, you are engaged only in 1% journalism by definition. And this is, the takeaway. United States President Barack Obama addressed the leak during a press conference and said, quote, it's not that they're breaking the laws. This is the people that, take advantage of these tax havens. It's that the laws are so poorly designed that they allow people, if they got enough lawyers and enough accountants, to wiggle out of responsibilities that ordinary citizens are having to abide by, end quote. Well, I'll end it at that. At least, we can say he was an honest president, wouldn't you say? To the press court in front of him. What say you, Jeff? I mean, what was the point? I mean, who benefits from these sort of disclosures in our society?
Well, I think you can say a lot about this issue on many different fronts. For one thing, it is interesting that some of the politicians who set up these really onerous tax structures actually themselves feel the need to protect their assets against their own predatory tax behavior, taxation authority, and so I don't know. There's many things you can say. I would say on the one front, we as individuals, we all try to protect our assets. We all try to protect our privacies. Our privacy. We don't give our passwords to other people. We try to use whatever tax avoidance measures. Even the most socially liberal people that I know are some of the most astute people that I also know as being very skilled at protecting their finances and their wealth from being confiscated by what I would call predatory governments. So, I don't I don't have any problem at all with people choosing whatever means they can find to protect their what they've honestly earned against other people claiming the right to it. When you earn something, when you've produced something, nobody else has a right to that which you've earned, and that's the wealth that you've produced. And the idea that governments are just entitled to all of your wages until proven otherwise, I think is false morally. But even just to wrap up, in light of this issue, some of the people involved here are more guilty than others. But just in terms of protecting your assets or taking them offshore, I don't see that as any kind of a crime in the same way that murder, rape, fraud, or those things are crimes. People trying to protect that which they've earned is not a bad thing, I don't think. And so now what they should have done, respective to their local laws and all of that, and what was wise, and again, what these politicians have done to show their hypocrisy when they've condemned others for having done the same thing. That's all very interesting, but I think very little from what I've heard of this is what I would regard as truly criminal in the true sense of the word.
Now, who benefits from this disclosure, right? Information was disseminated to the public at large, and we learned that, there's an extensive tax haven network for the super rich who can take advantage of them. Correct, Jeff? Now, Jeff, is manufacturing large amounts of methamphetamine and distributing them to addicts any sort of, what would you say, legitimate enterprise in the general, would you say, in the world?
Well, if we want to talk about the war on drugs, we can talk about how manufacturing methamphetamines and really unbelievably potent drugs has happened. And I would argue that that's part of the drug war. That's prohibition. It was part of alcohol prohibition that we had bathtub gin and.
But would you say it would be a legitimate enterprise in the general?
Let me finish. But people voluntarily buying and selling recreational drugs, it happens now with alcohol, and it would absolutely, it's absolutely a legitimate business enterprise, even if you or I don't approve of it and wouldn't do the same things. So it's peaceful adults transacting in peaceful ways. So that is a legitimate business. I don't think it would be the same if we didn't have prohibition. It wouldn't be as intense and as.
Well, how about selling nuclear fissile material and the components to make a nuclear weapon to terrorists? Is that any sort of legitimate enterprise in the general, as far as concerning, world stability?
No, manufacturing goods and services or aiding and abetting people who are going to do real, actual harm to other people. No, that's not legitimate.
Okay, or for example, what do they call hostage exchange, like Iran-Contra, those sort of activities? Did you think Iran-Contra on any level was a legitimate endeavor for our government to take part in, exchanging weapons for hostages? Money from the Contras.
I think we're getting far afield from our topic, but
what we're talking about, Jeff, is you said that the government was predatory, correct? In its tax system.
I think the taxation system is largely predatory. The government claims the right to up to 50 or even it's been higher % of your income. Sure. And we outlawed slavery in the 1800s. Slavery said that you didn't own basically 100% of your labor. And so now we're haggling over 50 or 60% it seems like we haven't progressed as far as we might like to think in terms of how the income tax structure works.
But we could say one of the underlying goals, or the underlying goal behind this whole system, was to obscure any sort of oversight of where this money was doing or where it came from, wouldn't you say?
Well, there's a principle called innocent until proven guilty, and where money is going is not subject to the oversight of anybody
Oh, really?
under an innocent until presumed guilty situation, as far as I can tell.
There would be scrutiny if they went through traditional or the methods that we as ordinary citizens, this is what Barack Obama pointed out, there would be scrutiny to see where these monies were being used for or where they were obtained from. But the super wealthy and, their government leaders, took pains to use this Panamanian system of over 200,000 shell companies to hide the facts of where they got the money and what they were using for. You see that as any sort of transgression of ethics?
I would like to see lower income people have the same kind of options, and maybe entrepreneurs could come up with those kinds of things, but not if we clamp down on offshore, investments and stuff like that. So I would be fine with poor people having access to those kinds of protections against their assets as well, and investment opportunities. So I don't want to. It's the super wealthy, and I don't want this just to be about envy and if only it was if only it was the poor people, it would be okay. I would be fine if poor people had those options too, and maybe if we opened up our tax code and made it less onerous, or maybe not even an income tax based situation. I think poor people. None of these things would have to be the case if it wasn't for our tax code and that of other Western nations and Eastern nations. That's why people have to protect their assets. People have left those countries because their earnings were absolved in the political system, and this is not something we should dismiss.
So you would say that, who benefits from this disclosure, that our country will start adopting, the Panamanian, structure of shell companies? You think that's going to be the benefit, that we're going to have a reduction in oversight as far as where you got your money and what you're doing with it?
Yeah, that's nobody's business unless you're presumed guilty of a crime.
Jeff, it's better to, arrest the people after they commit the crime or during the, the activity itself, Well, it's better to arrest them after they do the crime, or is it better to get them in the act?
Well, it would be better to catch them in the act, but it's not better if you catch them before the act, or because you think they're going to commit the act when maybe they won't.
I agree.
Yeah, we don't have pre-crime like Minority Report.
Right.
So yes, if after the fact somebody has committed a crime and maybe we find out they have some assets hidden overseas, then that would be a more or less fair game as far as I'm concerned, and a just legal system. But treating everybody like a criminal preemptively is not just. That's pre-crime. That's Minority Report.
You saw what has happened now is several current leaders of these countries. There's like over 20 countries, I think, named in these papers so far, are being seen as hypocritical for their country is undergoing some sort of financial duress, and they have millions that they've hidden.
Yeah.
Through these systems. What do you think? What do you say about that, Jeff?
Well, I think that's neat. I'm glad they were exposed. Unfortunately, a lot of innocent people, I think, in this were exposed as well. But no, that's great. I love that David Cameron, after having condemned others for engaging in these activities, well, look, guess what? He was engaged in it too. I think that's wonderful. I think that's a great silver lining to this kind of revelation.
Okay, Jeff, let's go ahead and go to our second subject. Okay, you said innocent, right? You mean innocent legally, not innocent ethically.
I meant innocent ethically, innocent morally. Like they haven't committed force or fraud against another human being. That's what I normally mean by innocent. I don't mean that they conform to the current statutory laws, which may or may not uphold those principles. I'm talking about this person has not, person X has not committed force or fraud, has not stolen from, has not used the really strictly speaking strong coercion against another person. That's what I mean. That's what I generally mean by innocent, unless I otherwise qualify it.
Fine. Okay. Let's talk about ethics avoidance within political systems. We have various political systems, across the world here, across the globe. When one gets into power, they seem to feel that they're above the laws of their country.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say it's endemic, among those who
Yeah.
attain power, or is there a system which, a person doesn't feel like they're obligated to, use things like tax havens or hide their money?
No, it seems to me that an awful lot of people, perhaps not all people who get into power, but most of them think that they are the ones in power, and that they can fudge the laws.
Right.
The ends justify the means, and I agree with you on that wholeheartedly. I mean, David Cameron should be called to task on that for hypocrisy. I don't think what he's done is criminal, but I think it should be exposed. Perhaps where he got the money was criminal. I don't know, but it should be exposed that yes, he claims that this is a terrible thing to do, and yet he does it. And I'm sure you would find many Americans who do the same thing. Most Americans try to protect their wealth. Most people in the world do. We work hard for our money.
It's common sense to protect what you've earned.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay, Jeff. America right now, we're in a political election, and we really want a strong leader, right? And there was this movie, several years ago, a wonderful movie called Dirty Harry with Clint Eastwood. Okay, America appreciates the Dirty Harry, that gets the job done, over the law. Pretty much he is the law, Judge Dredd. Or do we really want people who are in power, who have such great authority, to follow laws? Are we, the ends justify the means, Jeff?
Maybe I'm the odd man out here, but I don't. That would be what I would attribute to a great president. So, in fact, there's a wonderful book out called "Recarving Mount Rushmore" by Evan Eland, and he takes all of the Ivan Eland. I'm sorry. He takes all of the presidents and he rates them on their ability to maintain peace, prosperity, and liberty, rather than the usual historic evaluations of somebody being bold and somebody being, getting us into war and stuff like that, being a war kind of commander. And when you turn this list upside down and look at some of the people who decided to forego historical prominence and were just maintenance presidents, and maybe kept us out of wars, maybe actually didn't do things to exacerbate a bad economy, which they could conceivably be perceived as being the people who got us out of it, or who made it tolerable. You take that list of presidents, you find a completely different inverted list of people. So no, not everybody likes the Dirty Harry kind of no nonsense president. You take the what most academics consider the top presidents and turn it upside down, and I think that's what most peace-loving, freedom-loving people would find to be the best presidents, and they would be the ones that you've never heard of, like John Tyler would probably be at or near the top. Martin Van Buren. These are presidents that kept us out of war and who protected people's rights.
Within modern memory, Jeff, any that people would readily recognize?
In modern times, I would say Jimmy Carter was not.
Carter.
He was not an awful president. It's again, the bar is pretty low in modern times because all of them were awful in many ways. But the Jimmy Carter was a more peaceful president, and unfortunately, he was one of the most unlucky presidents insofar as some of the really good things he didn't come to fruition until after he was gone.
Right.
And when Ronald Reagan was president. For example, Jimmy Carter appointed probably the best Fed chairman there ever was. Now, I don't think there should be such a thing as a Fed chairman, but if there ever was a good one, Paul Volcker was the least political, and he actually let interest rates rise to where they needed to be to rein in on the runaway inflation that had been going on in the 70s. He was appointed by Carter, not by Reagan. And Reagan even didn't like him. Reagan thought he was going to ruin his presidency because the correction that was happening was under his watch. The correction that needed to happen was under Volcker's watch. And so Carter started that. He also deregulated the airline industry, which actually saved many lives. Air travel was prohibitively expensive. It's actually safer rather than traveling by highway. And Carter's deregulation of airways brought competition to the marketplace, and it made airways affordable. Now, rich people will say, "Oh, it's terrible. We used to dress up and fly, and it was so wonderful, and all this great food." But most people couldn't fly. I flew one time that way when I was a kid because I'm old, and it was pretty awesome. But now people can afford to fly on airplanes. It's much cheaper, and it's much safer than being on the roads. Unfortunately, the TSA has ruined a lot of that and made it too much of a hassle to fly short distances. But for a good while, air travel was cheap and affordable to everybody, and that's a wonderful thing. And that happened under Carter. He also deregulated gas prices, which actually drove prices down. Everybody said that was going to make prices
interesting, Jeff. Well, let's go ahead, admit that Carter did have some accomplishments. Why don't I bring this up? Okay, Jeff, there are terrible people that want to bring harm to Americans, right? Want to do malice against our country. So our president takes, these things called executive orders to have these people droned out of existence. So we really don't know, the activities. I mean, he doesn't ask people if he should knock these people off. He just takes it upon himself. Sometimes these people are American citizens. So, I mean, is it incumbent upon, people when they do get in the power to, they have to have expedient, actions to take care of people that want to do harm to his country. So they do these things, above the law. Obama is judge, jury, and executioner in these cases, against the people that want to do us harm.
Well, a couple of things. So let's say if that's really the best way to protect us against predators, why don't we do that nationally too? We know nationally that's not the thing to do, to have one person as the arbiter of life and judge, jury, and executioner, as you say, of other people. So why is that suddenly such an enlightened thing to do overseas and something we have to do? No, it's unjust. It creates terrorists for every I think these drone attacks, the last I heard, for every sort of somebody who was actually declared to be a legitimate target, there are 20 unknowns.
Collateral damage.
This collateral damage, right. But you're not necessarily, when you slaughter dozens of people, even if this one person was so awful that you had to do this, you've created in the minds of all these loved ones more terrorists. You've inflamed the situation. But even if that were not the case, we know that allowing a one person to be giving this kind of power to assassinate is just the worst possible authority you could give to any figure. I mean, haven't we seen all these dictatorships and all of this stuff? For us to just roll over and grant this authority to somebody for no reason, and I would say that the reasons are really shaky. This happens in countries where there's no declared war, but there's
no state to declare war on.
Even the countries we are at war at, they weren't declared wars either. They're
that's right,
and they're what the CIA called blowback. So what happened at 9/11, as horrible as it was, and I was horrified when I saw it, as everybody was, but this is what the CIA called blowback. It was the result of previous administrations acting covertly or overtly in the case of the bombings of Iraq in the 90s after the war was declared ended. Actually, the war was never declared, so
Right.
after the war was seemingly ended, there were continual bombings, and this was all blowback from that, as the CIA itself calls it. And the
I'll give you all that, Jeff.
Yeah.
Now let me ask you this, Jeff. Okay, how should a president go about getting rid of these cockroaches?
Well, first of all, by not calling them cockroaches.
Okay.
That's not helpful, I don't think.
Okay, you want a politically correct way of waging a war against terrorists?
I don't think it's political correctness just to not call somebody a cockroach. Maybe if you have some convoluted, syrupy phrase for people, maybe that's
a euphemism.
So yes, what I think the U.S. should do is trade with the rest of the world, but not interfere in their affairs at all, and that would be a big step. We used to be big enemies with Vietnam, and now we're peaceful trading partners because we got out of their part of the world. We're not bombing them anymore. We should just trade with the rest of the world. And
there is also some pressures upon them, but yes, you have a point there. Okay, we should appease terrorists, right, Jeff? We should just say, hey, Sharia law really ain't that bad, so quit picking on us.
We should lead by example. No, we should not say Sharia law ain't that bad because we don't think Sharia law is good. But we should lead by example and show the rest of the world how good free enterprise and peace and
free enterprise.
Free enterprise, peace, and personal freedom, economic freedom are. That was fine at the end of the 19th century. People wanted to come to America, and they did. We didn't have to have walls or anything like that. People came to the U.S. to work and to make a better life for themselves. And so we should lead by example.
Interesting. Okay, Jeff, free enterprise is the better system, you believe, for ethics?
Free anything is better, yes.
Okay, is the Islamic State, harping on free enterprise, free trade, peace, or are they just pretty much want to have a one world caliphate?
Well, I'm sure there's lots of people who want a one world, who want Buntoism or Jeffism or whatever.
Buntoism.
Yeah, Buntoism.
You can't afford it.
Yeah, but it's not just what you might want. Like I would want to have products that everybody wanted to buy, and I would want no competition. But in terms of a political economic system, you want a free system where people can get in and produce products and services and goods and value for other people.
Okay.
And you want everybody to have access to that, and you will have excellence when you do that, and you will have a more moral and just system than you will with the one of conquest or.
Very good, Jeff. But people like the Islamic State have a very simpler philosophy. You either believe in Allah or. I mean, how do you deal with those sort of people?
The Islamic State is centuries old, and we never had to deal with them until we started interfering in their nation states. The U.S. and Britain carved up the Middle East after World War I, after the Ottoman Empire had conquered that area for many years. There were arbitrary lines drawn and phony states created. That drew together a lot of disparate people who didn't really like each other, and then you compound that with U.S. oil companies and all of that claiming their rights. The Iranian crisis began over the problems with BP, which at that time was the Anglican oil company. The popularly elected Prime Minister of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh, wanted to oust them, and that's when the U.S. came in with their secret CIA operatives to overthrow Mossadegh and put in the Shah of Iran, who was a brutal dictator in that region for years and years. So the West in Islam was doing fine. Now, at one point there was of course, the Crusades, which was pretty horrible, but that was in the part of the West.
No,
Not,
a couple
yeah,
centuries back. Okay, Jeff. So
yeah,
just to make it clear for our listeners, you're saying if we quote quit interfering, that they're going to leave us alone. Things will get back to the good old days of
yeah.
mostly
I
government.
don't think they'll be able to recruit people if they don't have foreign colonial occupiers. What would we do if we had people occupying our soil? What if the Chinese were at
That's a
our
good point.
harbors and in our states and telling our rulers what to do and saying this one has to be elected or not? We wouldn't be so happy about it either. So yes, maybe it wouldn't be perfect, but if you take Israel or Palestine before the 1940s, uh, most of the uh, most of the Jewish Palestinians did not want the Zion movement to occur because Jews and Palestinians were living peacefully in large part. There were hardly any conflicts at all until the
Like
Jewish
nowadays.
state came about. Yeah, yeah. So if you want peace and freedom, you don't want these kind of political mandates. So that's what we should get out of. We should now that is the way it is now in Israel and Palestine, but we should pull out. We should not be giving one side overwhelming force against the other. We should give them incentives to work it out, and that would be to not fund them, to let them both be on a relatively equal footing, and to work this out. So yes, non-intervention is the best policy in my
All right.
view for peace
Very
in the
good.
world.
I'll go ahead and cadence on that. But let me ask you this, Jeff. Should a political system be about ethics, or is ethics, farther down the totem pole? We should be more about
No,
peace.
politics is ethics in a social sense. So there's ethics is what you should do personally, but once you start interacting with other people, that's politics. So it's a subset of ethics. So they're not mutually exclusive at all.
Okay, very good. That's just, it reminds me of the G-Man thinking of, slavery wasn't that bad. If we could have a peaceful slavery, should we go in that direction, or, should we have the better ethics? But let's go ahead to subject number 3. Thank you, Jeff. Data dump journalism. Okay, what the Panama Papers are wonderful in that we have a new mode of journalism ever since, Snowden and what's her name? Chelsea Manning.
Chelsea Manning. Yeah.
Where they take it upon themselves, at however hazard to their careers and to their freedom, release information that is revealing of how systems work. Okay, people in power, how they actually operate, outside of laws or outside of any sort of scrutiny. Correct, Jeff? I mean, that's what journalism was all about: scrutiny, that we could actually see what was being put into the sausage, right? Upton Sinclair in the jungle. Data dump journalism is a return to that. Right now, we can actually see all the paper trail of the Nazis, basically, right? The ethics Nazis, and how they are having a Holocaust as far as avoiding the tax system, right? Okay, is this for real journalism, or is this just something that is used to manipulate systems? That's what I'm sure that these world leaders can say. Hey, you're destabilizing my country by showing everybody what I'm really doing.
Well, I'd like to answer that, but first I'd like to compliment you in pointing out that yes, actually, in the Holocaust, the Swiss bankers did protect a lot of the assets of the Jews whose assets were being unjustly confiscated. So I'm glad you pointed that out.
Right.
But I think you have to. There's different things you can say. So first of all, so if you're an employee for XYZ company, and you have an employment agreement, a confidentiality agreement, and you start revealing their secrets, I think they do have a legitimate claim against you. You violated their contract. Yeah, I don't think that's a federal crime or anything, but I think they would have a legitimate claim against you if you violated that contract, that agreement. So that's one thing. In the case of Edward Snowden, I think he acted very admirably.
Okay.
I think he legitimately could have revealed whatever he found and exposed. I think he could have dumped everything if he had wanted to. He actually, to his credit, sought to have the information achieve its best possible value without harming innocent people. So it was all vetted through Glenn Greenwald, a respected journalist.
Right.
I think he made a really good choice there. I think he found
and for his efforts, he had to flee this country to Russia.
Yes, he had to, ironically,
Right.
Get sovereignty as a political prisoner on free speech grounds in the former Soviet Union. So that was that's really an irony. And people say, well, why couldn't he have just gone through proper channels? Well, if you look at
an interesting question, isn't it, Jeff?
Well,
proper channels, what would that have contaminated, tampered the evidence? I believe he thought so.
Well, we don't have to speculate, because we know we see Thomas Drake and Binney, the NSA guys who decided to go up through the ranks. Binney, who's older than I am, probably in his 60s, diabetic. He was arrested in his home with a SWAT team. He didn't have his leg on. He had a prosthetic leg that wasn't even on. He was dragged out of his house. And so Snowden saw what happened to him, saw what happened to Chelsea Manning, and knew that this president, this Obama, who wanted to make the world more safer for whistleblowers, has actually been the worst president combined. He's attacked more whistleblowers than any previous president, than all of previous presidents, not any previous president, but all of them. He's using the Espionage Act, which was this obscure thing to go after spies during World War I, to go after Snowden. So Snowden acted heroically. So, whether we're talking about offshore banking or whistleblowing or any of these things, we have to come to terms with the fact that sometimes good people violate bad laws, and that's what happens. That's what we've seen in recent times. And whether it's an offshore banker, now if it's some sleazy politician like Cameron or whatever, that's one thing. But people protecting their assets, the government claims the right to, if you're driving across state lines and you have more than $10,000 cash, let's say you're going to close a real estate deal, they'll take your money from you on the spot, and you have to prove that you're innocent to get it back. So this idea of people protecting their assets from government, I don't think we need to get the vapors every time we hear this. It's a legitimate concern, and if you don't have assets, it's easy to say, oh, well, it's easy.
Okay, Jeff. But what I'm talking about now, Jeff, is journalism. Jeff, let's suppose that the KGB decided to dial me up, on my cell phone and say, I want, Bunto, here's some sensitive information about the current state of the CIA in your country, and gave me this information, and I released it, on G+. Could I be considered a journalist?
If the KGB fed you that information?
Right. The KGB fed me damaging and sensitive information about my country's internal security apparatus. And it says, do what you want with them, Bunto. So I released them on G+ for everybody to preview. I mean, could I be considered a journalist?
Well, I think you would be, if you reported that, you could be considered doing journalism. Now,
okay, interesting.
At what point you become a journalist is probably something that those in the profession might have something more to say than I do. So, at what point do you become, from driving a car to being a professional driver? I don't know. That's something that people.
What differentiates a trader from a journalist?
Oh, I see. Oh,
me from Chelsea Manning.
Well, if you're a truth teller, I don't think you're a traitor.
Okay.
I mean, traitor against whom?
I know that the CIA is on a secret assassination wet team on behalf of Israel for whatever, favors that we have to owe Israel. So, the Russians tipped me off on that, and I released the information here on G+. That's very sensitive and damaging information. Am I a journalist, or am I a traitor to my country's, security apparatus? I don't know why they're doing this.
You're a journalist. If they want to keep those secrets,
Israel.
they should do it. But you're a journalist.
Okay. So you would still consider me a journalist and not a, traitor to my country?
Yes. If you reported the truth, absolutely.
Okay. Would I be above reproach? I mean, could I just say, hey, I'm a journalist. I don't see why you guys are throwing me in prison for the rest of my life. I mean, would I be above reproach claiming I'm a journalist, or would I have to held accountable for my, treacherous acts against my country?
No, I think we're supposedly we have free speech in the United States. And if you come upon this story, the Pentagon Papers were a good example of discovering what the the government was up to for years and years. Yeah, and that undermined that definitely undermined the established military-industrial complex and all they were up to. But miraculously, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of that being free speech, and I think that was the correct decision.
Interesting. Okay, Jeff, if you're on the Supreme Court and a case like this came up, how could you differentiate, somebody actually trying to tell you what is going on with our country and being a traitor? I mean, suppose the Soviets, or I don't want to say Soviets, but the Russians totally manufactured that evidence, and I'm like an idiot. Go ahead and, tell out, what the people are doing, and it's none of it's right. It's disinformation. Remember that disinformation that the Soviets used to do against America? So I release disinformation and it causes a huge stink, but none of it's true. I mean, wouldn't I still be, not a journalist, but a traitor? I'm just like a Soviet puppet.
I'm not a fan of the traitor thing. I don't know that I've ever myself considered anybody to be a traitor. So,
interesting.
I don't know what to what I would ascribe that to. But if somebody's
a traitor is somebody who's operating to damage their own country on behalf of a foreign power. How's that?
Well, I don't know. I think the Pentagon Papers probably worked in the favor of some of the enemies of the U.S. at the time, but they were the truth, and I don't think that's traitorous.
Okay.
I guess where it's normally applied is in times of war. If you give away specific secrets and stuff like that, I guess if anything, that might be something. But usually, when the U.S. has been at war, it's not been that clear as to who really was the good guy and the bad guy in that situation. So, I don't really. I've never encountered somebody that I thought was really a traitor. That's not in my vernacular.
How would you, examine and scrutinize data dump journalism then? I mean, could you do so, or would you accept what anybody says as valid on its face?
I think if somebody dumps a lot of data, as I say,
data dump.
I think that's that if anything is a conflict between them and their employers, but if they come into possession of it, it's fair game in my view.
It's fair game.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me, I can think of a myriad of what do you call hypotheticals, but what? Okay.
What's your best one?
Well, I was thinking, just like the one that I thought about, like if a foreign power feeds me disinformation and I, take it upon myself to, disseminate it to damage my countries, it's damaging on its face. I'm not a journalist in the fact that I did not scrutinize, to see if this actually was true, what the foreign power was telling me about my own country. You see what I mean? That's how come I believe that to be a journalist, you actually have to take, the steps to be a journalist. You have to examine the material that you have to have confirmation, more than one source telling you that this activity is going on. So, in this case, the more information, Jeff, you have to admit is the better, right? I mean, not if you just have a simple source of information. You have to have, like in the case of the Panama Papers, it was the biggest, information dump of all time, according to Snowden and, other sources, WikiLeaks. They say that it went back, for years, right, all the way to the 70s. So in my mind, that gives it validity as being, journalism. But, a foreign power, me being a puppet, at the hands of a foreign power, I just do not see that as journalists. I see that as being a traitor.
But I think most journalists will tell you that getting credibility is not as easily come by. So anybody could come out and say, "Oh, guess what? I was just talking to the Russian government, and they said blah 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 blah."
Right.
But I'm Jeff Keller. I'm not a reputable journalist, and people would likely say, especially in the absence of any kind of treason or any kind of repercussion, they say, "Well, he sounds like a flake. I don't know why I would agree with him." But we listen to people all day long who make claims about 9/11 or things like that are unsubstantiated, and those are all things that are not flattering to the government, and they're not treasonous to me. They're just either right or wrong. And this whole treason thing comes to me from a kind of an ugly nationalistic place,
okay, interesting,
and kind of a militaristic kind of place. So no, I don't think if this or that guy on the internet who thinks that 9/11 was an inside job or whatever. I don't think that's treason. That should be a free exchange of ideas, and that person should be evaluated just like anybody else.
What would you do if you became, our president in 2016 of America? How would you handle Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden?
I would pardon them immediately.
You would pardon them immediately. Okay. What would you tell our country about Chelsea Manning?
I would tell them that both Chelsea and Edward Snowden acted heroic. They made unbelievable personal sacrifices to tell you what the government was doing to you. Okay. So I would absolutely I would pardon them, and I would treat them like heroes, and others too.
Okay, and then you do so, Jeff, and then we find several other leaks start getting disseminated because the Russians find it's a bonanza now. Anybody they can give disinformation can get pardoned by President Keller. What would you?
Well, we found a lot of things about the Soviet Union after it collapsed, and Russia's still there.
Okay.
So no, we have to own up to these things. The U.S. has done terrible things, so we own up to a lot of it. We know that Jim Crow was a bad thing. We know that what was done to the Indians was a really horrendous thing, and on and on. So we have to be grown up and learn from our mistakes. Otherwise, we're going to keep making them. We
have to be grown up and learn from our mistakes. I love to use that for our transition to our fourth and final subject, our great debate community and Shamos, the morality policeman. Okay. Well, Jeff, could you just give a quick, background as much as you know about Shamos, just what comes off the top of your mind as far as his stature within our community?
Shamos is an outspoken speaker on mostly on Google Hangouts that I've known him on. He's very religious. I don't know exactly what his denomination is, but I think it's pretty much fundamentalist. I think he's a super nice guy to talk to. I think he also is conservative politically. I've agreed with him on some issues and not on others. So I've heard stories recently where he's made blanket condemnations of people, but I don't have firsthand knowledge of that. I've only heard it through hearsay, so I don't really want to comment on it. But that's what I've heard. So maybe you know more than I. So I'll let you go from there.
You did well. Shamos has taken it upon himself to opine upon the activities of people in our community, correct? Okay, if I was going to take a journalistic approach and just release all the dirty laundry of the people I know in the great debate community, I mean, would you think that was ethical and journalistic? Or, the second that I started opining about it, saying, well, this person did something bad, that would, instantly invalidate my activity of, airing out everybody's dirty laundry.
No, I mean, I think if people are innocent and they try to lead private lives and they're not public, I think ethically you should leave them alone.
Okay.
But I don't think it's criminal if you don't leave them alone. I don't
they're public figures, correct?
Well, arguably, I don't know. I mean, we all go out into public. I go into a coffee shop, and I guess I'm a public figure when I'm out there, but
Okay.
where that line is. But no, I don't think legally there's a strong line, and I know in cases of slander and libel law, which I don't think are really libertarian laws.
Okay, interesting.
I don't think there's a clear line. They draw some line about a public figure, but it's getting harder and harder to say who's a public figure and who isn't. So I think it's an unethical thing to
Okay, very good.
to call people out who are just kind of minding their own business. And
all right, well, calling people out and then capitalizing upon it, because the reason that I understood that he did this was in retaliation to this. I don't know if people in our community are familiar with that. There's this person, what's his name, Matt Slick, who has a daughter who is an aspiring adult actress. Right. And apparently he was in a hangout where he was, porn bomb, that's what they call it, with his daughter's material. And what Shameless did was in retaliation. It was sort of like a vendetta to say that, not everybody's nose is clean in the great debate community who, poo-pooed the activities of the person that did do the porn bombing. They wanted to hold that person who did the porn bombing to account, and Shameless basically said, well, this is the activity of, the people that are poo-pooing him. Did you understand? Or what I'm trying to say is that,
well, I think it's fun. No, I think I think it's fine to call the people out who slandered this other guy if he's
fine.
What his daughter does is not really
on point, or not
on point. And and if somebody who is dredging that up rather than talking about the issue at hand, that seems to be something I might even want to do. So I think that's kind of legitimate.
Okay, well, Jeff, let's suppose Shameless took it upon himself to report your activities. How would you feel about it?
I would feel like that was irrelevant.
Right. Okay.
I usually don't talk about, but most of what I say is independent of my own personal activities.
Okay, Jeff, is there such thing as a relevant morality that the great debate community has to be concerned about? Be it drinking or saying naughty words or dressed immodestly. Is there some sort of relevant morality that
Well, I think if you're decrying drinking or something like that, and you're snockered, that's worth pointing out.
Yeah, the hypocrisy.
But if you're decrying drinking and your spouse or your loved one is a drinker,
beating your wife, right, or something,
that's not fair. I don't think. So,
right. Well, I mean, okay, Jeff, why do people all of a sudden want to become the morality policeman? I mean, what is the mentality there? Can you do any psychoanalysis for us? They feel like they need to correct behaviors.
Well, I think people correctly realize that human beings don't have instincts. We really only have our conceptual faculty. So we do have to. Somebody's trying to get in, but we do have to use our conceptual faculty to make choices, and some of those choices may be universal in nature and some not. We need some, in many cases, some means to guide the choices that we make. So I think people justifiably recognize that morality is important. Unfortunately, I think they sometimes embrace theories of morality that are subjective or that are not.
I agree.
Yeah, that are just not sound or not defensible on a universal scale, and impose them on other people, and that's when you have problems. But I think people do recognize that that morality and that some universal codes of behavior are necessary, because we as human beings, we don't have instincts. We don't have. Our means of survival is pretty much our minds. And if we don't use our own minds, we have to use the minds of others. I can be the most irrational person in the world, but for me to survive where I live in the wintertime, I have to depend on people who know how to get heat to me, people who know how to get food to me across vast interest. Yeah, it's a cooperative network. And it's dependent upon the rationality of human beings, even if we ourselves may choose to evade that rationality from time to time. And and unfortunately, and fortunately, rather, our rationality, one component of is our moral system, and knowing how to make right and wrong decisions, and that's the realm of ethics, and that's what I think people recognize,
Okay.
even though
So
they
basically
act
you're
as their
saying,
own police.
Jeff, just sorry to interrupt, you're saying there's basically little utility in having a pope for the great debate community. You know, we need to act in a cooperative fashion to, you know, work through things instead of, you know, calling out each other's
There's no evidence that
peccadillos.
the Pope or anyone in particular on Google Plus uh, has any more going for themselves in their own rational capacity and their
Really?
ability to make positive arguments. But yes, if anybody declares themselves as the arbiter of morality without any basis in that, we should dismiss it, whether it's the Pope or whether it's Shamos or
Shamos.
anybody else.
Okay. Well, Jeff, I'd like to thank you for a wonderful interview, and I'd
That
like to
was
ask you,
fun.
could you
Yes,
hold on for you know, let some people in if they want to talk, our participants?
absolutely.
Okay. Well, let me go ahead and take a few minutes here to get out some invites. Thanks again, Jeff. Hold on.
My pleasure. Hey, Bunto, I'll be back in about 3 minutes.
Okay. Everybody's invited.
Anybody out there?
Nah. You know, I have to admit, you know, I did this hangout through the YouTube live instead of Google Hangouts, you know, doing it through G
Mhm.
Plus. And I don't think I get the same effect when I run it through G Plus. When I get it through G Plus, I get people watching. But I think when I run it through YouTube Live, and the reason I do that is because I want to enable that chat live that people keep asking about. I just do not get viewers on my shows, so I think this is the last dogfight I'm going to run through YouTube. I'm just going to run it through the G Plus.
Yeah, I think I know normally, like Nadia has started running through YouTube, and I've not seen any of her.
Yeah,
Somebody's trying to ring into me.
Go ahead and answer. I mean, unless, what else can we talk about? I mean, well, why don't we can vamp on the Pentagon Papers, the import of that. I think, some people that are absolutely noobs to how journalism used to be, right, Jeff? I mean, when there was actually politicians fearful of the journalism, quality of journalism in America, those days are gone forever, I believe, ever since the Iraq War, ever since Scooter Libby. You want to go ahead and vamp on the Pentagon Papers?
Well, if you Daniel Ellsberg has been asked about Snowden and why Snowden didn't do what Daniel Ellsberg did in '68 and stand trial and go through channels and all of that. And Ellsberg himself has said, and I've met Ellsberg, as a matter of fact. I had the pleasure of meeting him one time, about 3 or 4 years ago. Yeah, amazing guy. But he said that that he would have done as Edward Snowden did. Now there wouldn't be any chance that Snowden could have a fair trial or that could be treated fairly in any way, which was much different from. I mean, Ellsberg was abused badly in '71. Ellsberg brought down the Nixon presidency not because of not directly because of the Pentagon Papers, but because Nixon ordered the break-in of his psychiatrist's office
to get some dirty goods on him,
to get some dirt on
the White House plumbers.
Now Nixon looks like a piker compared to our current regime, who uses.
I completely agree with you.
NSA,
Nixon was born too early.
Yeah, Nixon absolutely was nothing compared. I mean, he was a crook and a psychopath and a human being. I don't want to take anything away from him, but he was not. He didn't have anything near the means that are modern.
Well, to fill in our noobs, let me give some quick backstory on the Pentagon Papers, as I know it. That we were led into the Vietnam War on a false flag operation, the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, that our ships were attacked in international waters by the North Vietnamese. Our ships were just minding their own business, and these guys decided to attack, which is not true. We were aiding a CIA operation inside their waters. And in fact, the second attack, maybe the first attack did actually happen, but the second attack was an absolute fabrication on the part of the naval authorities there. And that, of course, led us to the resolution that allowed us to escalate into the Vietnam War. So, of course, America did not know about this at the time, right? The president's not going to say, hey, everybody, that attack never happened, right? There was no investigation of the Gulf of Tonkin, right, Jeff? There was just a revelation that it was a false flag via the Pentagon Papers. So that is the beauty of that sort of journalism, is that the truth was told other than oversight, right?
I don't know that the Pentagon Papers actually addressed Tonkin. They actually went back into the 40s. They may have, but the predominant thing was it had to do with French colonialism.
Sure.
The Dien Bien Phu situation and all of that, and how the U.S. wanted to stand behind the French to uphold the colony. And I guess it did. I guess the papers did address Tonkin, now that I think of it.
And they also addressed the fact that Westmoreland was lying to us.
Yeah, you're right. Yes.
Communist infiltration.
You're correct. Yes, because they did address Westmoreland was lying. Johnson and McNamara knew about the lies. They knew it was unwinnable, but they wanted to save face. And Yes, you're right. They did address all that because the Pentagon Papers were actually released in '71, so it was past all of that time.
Now, juxtaposed to the Panama Papers, what's interesting is that America really wasn't fingered in this disclosure. Even though it was the biggest data dump in
Yeah,
history.
there weren't a lot of Americans in that, and that's interesting. And I hadn't looked into why that is yet. Maybe you have.
The only thing that I saw was that some people that were fingered earlier, as far as being tax avoiders, were fingered in this attack, but the real main protagonists are the UK. They're the biggest offenders, and of course the Panamanians that set up over. Isn't it strike you incredibly that there was over 200,000 shell companies that these that this it was these lawyers, these Panamanian lawyers set up that that they had such, what would you say, power that they could use to avoid any sort of scrutiny until this dump of information.
Yeah.
A week ago, let's say this 6 months ago, I think this thing was dumped in 2015 to the to the reporters. We did not know the extent of Panamanian philandering. I mean, I don't look at it as the up and up, Jeff. I think we have to have oversight in an international scale as far as this sort of money laundering, because you're right that it is incumbent upon the person to actually project their legitimate wealth, Jeff. But I believe if it's I imagine a lot of this is illegitimate wealth, ill-gotten gain that they can use to this apparatus to make the money clean. And then added bonus, we find out that our world leaders are facilitating this sort of activity.
Well, I don't know. We have to say, well, I suspect that some people who do X, Y, and Z are guilty. Well, that's fine, but you have to make a case against those people that you think that really are guilty. Last thing
in the world that these world leaders would want right now. I mean, they are caught in their hand in the till, and now they're going to reap the repercussions. The Icelandic leaders.
That's legitimate. I mean, if they're exposed for having protected their assets from their own predatory tax structure.
Well, is that a legitimate defense that Cameron can bring up? That he was protecting his own.
A legal defense, yes, but hypocrisy defense, no. I mean, he may suffer politically and maybe justly so.
Okay. If you were to be a judge in this case, what would you look for? Would you look for, definite illegal activity, like say meth dealers funneling their money to Panama, people that are selling weapons to terrorists? Is that what you're looking for? If you're a judge of this?
I don't view meth dealing as a crime, as a legitimate crime. It's an enterprise.
How about slave trade, sex slave trade? Would you look at that as something to?
Yeah, if there were plaintiffs against people who had enslaved them or used force to subjugate them, and some of their assets were buried in these schemes, it would be legitimate to go after their assets.
From sex slavery. They're hiding the money through the Panamanian corporations. I mean,
well, they should be liable no matter where their money is.
Right, I agree. Okay, so there is something that you can crack down on with this. These
but
papers are not for naught.
That doesn't give you a license to treat innocent people as if they are guilty. But if they are guilty and you're going after their resources and you have the means to go after foreign
leaders
things, in an effort to so in my view, justice is restored if it's not just a crime against the state. So if you enslave somebody, you owe that person that you enslaved, not the state. But if in the process of getting justice for that slave, that person who was enslaved, you have to go after their assets and even foreign assets.
Okay, so you're saying that if somebody can present to you a case saying where somebody was coerced, you would be willing to prosecute them. Illegality.
Yeah. Yes, definitely.
Okay. Well, that's good enough.
If there's a victim, yeah.
Okay.
If there's a victim, there's a crime. If there's not a victim, there's not a crime. And I don't consider the state a victim if they're unable to tax.
There were millions of victims in the Vietnam War on our
Yes.
opponent. Henry Kissinger has been called, by the late Christopher Hitchens and many others to be a war criminal.
Yeah, agreed.
What's your say on that? I mean, should he be held to prosecution in The Hague?
Sure.
Why?
Because you don't get to be a murderer just because you claim you have a government
Well,
job.
what did he do? Just to clarify for the listeners, what did Henry Kissinger do as a war criminal?
Well, he oversaw the bombing of Cambodia, air bombs from nations that killed many innocent people. The Vietnam War was never declared, even if you think that's a legitimate way to excuse to bomb people. It was not done. So
Right.
he was absolutely a war criminal.
So I think of like the Venezuelan regime or something that he knew about he sanctioned the assassinations of their populace. He knew that they were doing it, hid it from,
Well, if he knew about it, that may not be sufficient. But if he aided, if he facilitated it, and if he was ordered it, or
the evidence.
Yeah, that could be. He could be deemed complicit in that. Sure, I think he could be deemed complicit in any number of world events because he had his paws all over world events during his reign.
Okay, so people in high power that have to be held accountable for the people that they kill. Is there any practicality to that? Obama, should he be a war criminal? Yes,
they would kill a lot fewer people, I would assume.
Okay, so how practically can we, take care of Obama, the war criminal? He's the leader of our country.
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. How do you compensate the victims of these crimes? I know Bush and Cheney are very loath to travel overseas because they think they will be arrested on war crime.
Okay,
yeah. They are very careful about where they go. They don't really go overseas because I think they know that they would be held on war crimes. But yeah, I mean, this is a tough thing. Obama. These are undeclared wars. Even if you think the declaration of war is some reign of legitimacy, I don't know that that's always the case. But these invading Libya destroyed a whole country, turned it into a terrorist nightmare. Iraq.
Iraq, yes.
No, Libya was.
I know we bombed Libya.
Yeah, we bombed Libya. We took out their horrible dictator and made the place hell on earth for everybody else who lived there.
Well, his own people did him in. Okay, Jeff. So
with the U.S.
war criminals, right? War criminals, Jeff. I mean,
Truman?
Are there war criminals or are there not?
Yes. I think the worst one is probably Harry Truman in modern times.
Harry Truman was a war criminal.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. He.
How about like Herman Goering? Wasn't he a war criminal?
Sure. Yes.
Okay. These people killed millions. Goering, Eichmann. Who else was a war criminal of note?
Stalin.
Oh, I was thinking about the Nazis, the ones that they killed. Okay, what I mean by war criminals, the actual people that were held accountable and paid for their acts.
Oh, well, unfortunately, there have been very few of them. But
the
Nuremberg trials.
Tojo, right? Wasn't he, executed as a war criminal?
Tojo, yes.
Okay, they're on the losing side of a war, so they get to be called war criminals.
That's basically what makes
be called a war criminal.
If you lost, you're a war criminal.
Dropping the nuke, I'm sure you would call a war criminal.
Among other things, yeah.
Okay, so why aren't people? I mean, the last war criminal, I believe, was the guy from Bosnia Herzegovina. What's his name? I forgot.
Milosevic.
Yeah, Milosevic. Wasn't he the last war criminal? And he died while still on trial. Is there any sort of practicality towards, holding dictators like the guy from North Korea happens to fall into our hands? Should he be held as a war criminal?
I don't know how practical it is. I think judging them as a war criminal, just calling them a war criminal and recognizing what a war criminal is and applying it to anybody who's a war criminal, regardless of what side they're on. I mean, what you do with them that's a judicial legal question. I don't have pat answers for that, but that they are war criminals. If anybody's a war criminal,
well, would the libertarian society have war criminals, or would this be privatized law that would
I think it would just be criminality. So if you killed one person or 10 people, it would be on a scale. Certainly, if you killed 1,000 or 1,000,000 people, it would be that much higher. And but I don't think there would be very many war criminals on the libertarian side of things. There might be some that might try to overtake a libertarian society, but a libertarian society would be very, very hard to overtake because it would not have a central government. So when a ruler wants to take over another country, they try to take over their military and their central tax collecting authority. But when you don't have that in a libertarian society, if it's decentralized and there's no taxing authority or anything like that, you would literally have to go door to door. And no military really is mighty enough to do that or has the will to do that. So I think it would be very hard to take over a libertarian society of any size.
Okay. I guess you could say one principle that we could, apply towards the war criminals, they'd have to have some sort of power over the military, right? I mean, you couldn't call like Pat Robertson a war criminal, right? Because they have no power over a military apparatus. So it'd have to be a leader of a country or some sort of,
Well, I don't think I would call him a criminal. I don't know that Pat Robertson's a criminal. I think he's a religious guy, but
right. But I mean, if somebody called, I'm trying to think of, the leader of the Mormon Church a war criminal, you would have to say, well, this person needs to have some sort of power.
I don't think he is a war. Well, I don't know why you're using that as an example. I'm
trying to think. Somebody comes to you and says, Martha Stewart is a war criminal. You could say, well, I'm sorry, but she's not, because she has no power over a military apparatus. See what I mean? I'm trying to make the distinction.
Yeah, I would just say criminal. I don't think war criminal is.
No, we're talking about war criminals, Jeff. So I'm trying to help for the listener to distinguish what actually is a war criminal.
Well, I only refer to. I would refer to like Cheney or Bush or Truman or people like that as war criminals, because yes, they were in the name of war. They committed atrocities against civilians.
But most importantly, they had power over a military apparatus.
They did, yes. And they were involved, at least ostensibly, in something called a war. So they could be called a war criminal. But why Martha Stewart? Well, Martha Stewart is not
hard to call Martha Stewart because she had no power over a military apparatus.
Well, no, I wouldn't call her a criminal of any kind. I think.
Well, welcome to the internet. You'll see, people believe that the Earth is flat here and that we never landed on the moon. You'll meet all sorts, Jeff.
Well, Martha Stewart wasn't even tried for being an insider trader, which I think is a bogus crime to begin with. But she was tried for lying to federal authorities. Now, federal authorities can lie to you all they want, but it's really terrible if somebody lies to them.
Oh, interesting. Perjury. Okay. Jeff, we'll let us know.
It wasn't perjury. No, she wasn't under oth.
I thought it was perjury. Oh, I thought she messed up on a affidavit. What do they call it?
No. She just It's if you're being investigated, you need to clam up because if you lie to the investigators, the people that come to your house, if they're federal, you can be charged with lying to them.
Right.
It doesn't matter whether you're under oath or not.
Interesting. I didn't know that. Well, Jeff, I just wanted to add, close on this note. I saw a fantastic movie about Too Big to Fail. It was made, after the 2008 collapse. And it showed in the movie how like 10 bankers are running our system, and how, they had this point in the movie where Paulson was meeting the Chinese ambassador or the Chinese financial leader. And the financial leader told him that we were right in the middle of this housing crisis, that the Soviets, Jeff, that the Russians wanted to dump all the stocks that they had in Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac on the market, in order to instantly destroy our economy. and the Chinese respectively declined. And you could see within the actor, who was playing Paulson, that it had some effect, some terrorizing effect, that our company could be, our economy, our economical system, financial system could be destroyed
Sure.
so quickly, by
Well,
our overextension of wealth, and exactly how we let foreign investments work within our country.
well, no, that's what happens when the U.S. is supposed to be a capitalist economy, but money and credit, which are two of the main pillars of an economy, are controlled by the government almost entirely. And so, yes, you can be brought to your knees when that's the case, when you have a monetary system that inflates the currency, that devalues it. And
Or centralized.
you have an artificial credit system that grants loans, that grants loans without respect to credit worthiness or anything of the kind. You have those two lethal combinations, and yes, we can be brought to our knees by foreign investors. Absolutely. But that's not capitalism. That's not laissez-faire. That's corporatism. That's fascism.
Jeff, what should be done about too big to fail at this point? Should we dismantle the banks? Should we break them up?
Nobody should be deemed to be too big to fail. If somebody fails, that's a good thing. That means they were not economically sound, and those resources that they were squandering for their inefficient and failed enterprises, they'll be directed towards more efficient and better resources. A truly free market system is not just a profit system; it's a profit and loss system, and the loss is just important. It's called creative destruction.
Well, they wanted to palm the loss off on the people. That's really, they wanted a bailout.
They wanted socialized loss and private gains, and that's not how a free market works. It's private gains and private losses, and you undermine it when the losses are socialized and they're not borne by those who make the bad decisions. That's why that's what's called a moral hazard. That's what happened.
Right. Now, Jeff, when the banks start failing, what can you do?
Let them fail.
Just let them fail.
Yeah. And let the better banks take their place.
Okay, you learned that in the movie it was plain to see that the Secretary of Treasury was manipulating Wall Street. How does that strike you? It was ostensibly a national emergency, our financial system collapsing. I mean, should the Secretary of Treasury, call up his old buddies at Goldman Sachs and tell them what to do?
No, absolutely not.
Okay,
that's why we got into this mess to begin with. The political
system. He's a free man today, walking around and selling his rights of his story to him. What is insider trading, Jeff? I mean, giving information of benefit to companies, before the investors have, access to this information. He knew that AIG was absolutely a hollow entity, and didn't even disclose this information to the President of the United States. He just, said he's going to take care of it with his banker friends. I mean, how does that strike you, Jeff? Is that something to go to jail with?
None of this stuff should have been
Chelsea Manning, or
none of this stuff should have been in the political system to begin with. AIG's problems should have been AIG problems, and they're nothing to do with the political system.
Okay.
So it shouldn't have had anything to do with it.
If you're the SEC chairman and you know that the financial system is going to cave in, and you learn that the Secretary of Treasury is, withholding information.
Yeah.
I mean, you go after the Secretary of Treasury, or do you help the guy try to help the system?
Well, the Congress is exempt from insider trading laws. They can enact laws, and they can trade and never be subject to any of that. So,
well, I guess the Treasury Secretary said the same thing. The same,
Yeah, maybe or maybe not. Maybe that's not in his employment agreement. But Congress is exempt. They should have nothing to do with how people buy and trade merchandise, stocks, or whatever. But if you know something about your stock, or something from the inside, you should be able to trade your stock.
Okay.
Well, I know this thing. I know they didn't get federal. A lot of this has to do with government decisions, by the way. But
Right.
I think that was Martha Stewart's thing. Like her stock, they knew they weren't going to get federal approval, and she found out about that. Of course, she should be allowed to sell her stock. And that helps. That actually helps everybody else. If she's selling her stock off, that sends a signal that this stock may not be worth anything.
Okay.
That actually is better efficiency. If people in the know are selling off something, you would want that. If you owned a stock, you would want people in the know to be buying and selling it based on solid knowledge rather than speculation and whim.
Okay, let's suppose you're president of the United States, Jeff, and you learned through the SEC chairman all the companies, excuse me, Jeff, that are absolutely bogus in America. Do you feel it's incumbent upon you to report that to the fellow citizens? Companies that are totally insolvent, yet Wall Street still allows to function, ripping people off?
No, I don't know that would be. I would, if I were a president, I would. It would be a total separation of state and economy.
Okay, so you would not report to your fellow citizens which companies were absolute junk.
No, I'm not a stock trader. I'm not a stock advisor.
Okay. Who should report to the American people that companies are absolutely bogus?
That should be done privately by private accreditation firms. By
we saw what happened. They were busy destroying documents during 2008.
Well, you look at Enron. Like Enron,
right.
People complained about Enron. People complained about Bernie Madoff for years and years and years to the SEC. They did nothing about it.
Right.
Enron was the Madoff thing was discovered. I forget which is which now. The Enron was discovered by, I think, Fortune magazine, and it was another reporter that discovered the Madoff things. Finally, went forward with that. Okay. Or either that, it was a rogue
trader.
No, it was somebody like that. It was somebody outside of the system. So those so-called oversight things that are done by the government, they always seem to be there after the fact, and they never seem to be on top of things. People complain to them, they never respond, and then when they do, and they're like, oh, well, we don't have enough funding. We should really have more money so that we would be better.
Okay,
so it's the absolute opposite of incentive as to the market. So if you're not succeeding in the market, you need to figure out ways to do things more efficiently. And get more
last question, Jeff. Wonderful answer, but what's the last? Who is going to oversee the libertarian free market? I mean, there's going to be no Securities Exchange Commission. Who oversees it? The market.
Well, oversight will be in demand. People will want to know if they're buying safe and sound certificates. So rather than depending on some politician who's only subject to re-election every 4 years and is a package deal with myriad other things that you may also be concerned with, you would want that to be done privately, and you would want to pay private firms to do due diligence and to make the best recommendations to you, and have their reputation be on the line to where they would lose money or go bankrupt if they failed to do their job, rather than a system where if somebody fails to do their job, they probably will get more funding because they will be able to browbeat and shame people into paying them more because they somehow didn't have the magic amount of money to do what they were supposed to do. So you would want a private system where people were actually dependent upon, like Consumer Reports. They're dependent.
Okay, Consumer Reports.
You would want a Consumer Reports of stock prices, which you actually have. You have all kinds of newsletters and stuff like that, but they would be more prominent if you didn't have the moral hazard of the SEC and stuff like that.
I was just thinking, is there any politician in your memory that's ever said dismantle the Security Exchange Commission? I can't think of anybody.
Well, we didn't have one. We didn't have one prior to FDR, so it's not unimaginable that we wouldn't have one. But in modern times, there have been various stages of deregulation. But you're right; politicians don't say things that are political.
Ron Paul saying get rid of it? I don't think so.
I don't know. He might have. He would probably if he was asked.
Get rid of SEC.
I don't know if he was ever asked.
All right. Well, Jeff, I want to thank you for a wonderful show as usual, and I invite all our guests to, all our viewers to, go back and submit any sort of questions or comments they have to whatever we discussed. And I wish you a good weekend, Jeff, and I'd like to wish the same to our viewers, and have a good one. Take care.
You too, Bunto. Thank you for the great questions and conversation. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.